32 inches. That number decides whether Marin can roll into a room or get stopped at the threshold of it.
Under the ADA, 32 inches is the minimum clear width a doorway has to provide for a space to be considered accessible. Clear width means the open space you're meant to pass through, measured in a way that assumes the doorway is doing its job with nothing in the way.
Marin's wheelchairs are just over 31.5 inches wide. That sounds close enough, right?
But the difference is everything. If a doorway only truly clears at 32 inches when everything lines up perfectly, then Marin is left with less than an inch of breathing room on both sides after the chair, the frame, the angles, and the real-world details show up.
A scuffed door frame, a hinge that sticks in, a door that doesn't swing fully open, a track of paint or grime that wasn't there yesterday. Any one of those can turn technically accessible into practically blocked. And Marin doesn't get to treat it like a maybe. The chair has to roll through now, in real time, with no rehearsal.
Here's the part most people outside a wheelchair never have to think about. The 32 inches figure is measured with a doorway in its cleanest, simplest version, frame to frame, with the door open, and with nothing intruding into that space.
Real buildings rarely behave like that.
Hinges take up room. Door closers are mounted low and jut out. Thresholds often have a lip, even when nobody would call it a barrier. Some places have a doormat that looks harmless from standing height, but from wheelchair height, it can feel like hitting a speed bump you didn't sign up for.
None of these obstacles are usually obvious to someone walking. A person can step over a threshold without a second thought. A person can swing a door wider with their body angled how it naturally wants to angle. Marin's body and chair move differently. When the doorway is already tight, every hidden inch becomes weight to push against, space to negotiate, and time spent trying not to get stuck in front of other people.
And the most frustrating thing is that people often assume the story is, if a place is accessible, then it's accessible. But Marin knows accessible can mean passes a rule on paper, not works for a person.
The ADA code was written with a particular set of assumptions. It's meant to create consistent minimums so builders can design spaces that meet a standard. But a standard isn't the same thing as lived usability.
Most adult wheelchairs and power chairs aren't tiny. Many sit right at or slightly above that 32-inch line once real elements come along for the ride. Armrests, wheels, foot plates, and the way the chair sits under a person.
So when a building designer hits the code minimum, the process can stop there. The space looks right on a measurement, so it gets labeled right. Yet a measurement doesn't test how it feels to roll forward while steering at the same time. It doesn't test how a door catches a wheel because it doesn't swing as far as expected.
It doesn't test what happens when the floor isn't perfectly level, or the door has been adjusted over time, or someone's added a new piece of hardware without realizing it changed the usable space.
Marin is the test that gets skipped.
Code compliance and real-world usability don't always overlap, and when they don't, the gap isn't abstract. The gap is the moment the chair stops, front wheels angled, momentum dying, shoulders tensing, while Marin tries to figure out whether this doorway will give a clean pass or demand an awkward adjustment. Bathrooms are the worst part of the story.
A building might meet minimums on the front entrance. Then, once the door closes behind Marin, the world shrinks fast. Bathroom doors are often narrower. The route into the bathroom can be tighter than the main hallway, and the space needed to turn, reposition, and access controls gets treated like an afterthought instead of a core design requirement.
Marin has walked into places that proudly display an accessibility sticker at the entrance, something bright and official looking. Then she gets to the bathroom and discovers it's not truly usable.
Not because someone was trying to be cruel. Often it's because someone checked a box somewhere earlier, measured a doorway, and assumed everything would work the same once the room was built. But bathrooms are cluttered by design. Grab bars get installed where they look convenient rather than where they help. Sink cabinets eat into turning space. Paper cowl holders, dispensers, and towel hooks appear at wheelchair height like obstacles disguised as features. Sometimes the bathroom door opens in a way that traps Marin at an angle. Sometimes there's no room to straighten out after entering. Sometimes the door isn't wide enough to allow a clean approach, and there's no margin to pivot safely. Marin can't outlogic a narrow doorway. The physics of chair width doesn't care about good intentions. This isn't only inconvenient, it's isolating.
When a doorway stops Marin, the ripple effects start immediately. A missed appointment isn't just a delay, it's a chain reaction. Plans reroute, schedules collapse, and time gets spent asking for help instead of doing the thing that was supposed to be simple.
And unlike a minor annoyance, this kind of barrier doesn't have an easy workaround most of the time. There's no just go another way when the accessible route loops right back to the same narrow point. There's no just move the chair a little when there's no extra inch to spare. Marin may end up turned around in a hallway, trying to angle the chair at just the right diagonal to squeeze through, while careful not to scrape paint off the wall, catch a hinge, or knock a door off its path. The emotional part shows up fast. There's a split second of calculation. How close can the chair go? How much force is safe? And what does it risk if the door doesn't open the way it should? And if people are nearby, the stress becomes visible, not because Marin wants attention, but because barriers turn private effort into public hesitation. The message, even when no one says anything, lands anyway. This space wasn't designed with you in mind. You have to adapt to it instead of it adapting to you.
That's exhausting in a way that doesn't show up in accessibility brochures.
The solution isn't complicated in spirit. It's complicated only in the sense that it requires caring about what happens after the tape measure comes out. For starters, building codes could require testing against a wider range of chair widths, not just the narrowest assumed case that technically fits.
Minimums are helpful, but minimums should reflect the reality of common chairs, power chairs, and everyday equipment that people actually use. Renovation permits could also require an actual accessibility walkthrough from a wheelchair perspective, not a theoretical review, not the doorway measures 32 inches, so we're done. An on-site check that treats the space as something people will live in. That kind of review doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be as straightforward as rolling the route, checking door swing, verifying clearance at hinges and thresholds, and confirming that the space in between entrance and restroom is truly navigable. And the cost argument doesn't hold up the way it gets used.
Retrofitting barriers after the fact costs more than building around accessibility from the start. But even during a build, the biggest expenses aren't the existence of accessibility, they're the delays and changes caused by realizing too late that minimum didn't mean works.
The real issue is a design decision. Code minimum is treated as the finish line instead of the starting point.
If you've used a wheelchair wider than standard, you already know this number. You've done the mental math, quietly, quickly, like a reflex, when you approach a doorway.
You felt it in your shoulders when the chair gets close enough that a mistake becomes real. You've watched other people stroll through without thinking while you measure inches with your body because the space is measuring you back.
You may also know the specific panic of doors that open only halfway, the kind of panic that makes time slow down just enough to notice every hinge and every corner.
If you don't use a wheelchair, you might never have cared about 32 inches, but you can start caring in a practical way. Next time you walk into any building, store, office, apartment, friend's place, notice the doorway details you normally ignore. Does the door swing fully? Is there a mat at the threshold? Is the hinge bulky? Does the door close softly or slam into its frame?
Accessibility isn't just the presence of a ramp or an elevator. It's the passage through the everyday parts, doors, hallways, bathrooms, turning spaces, the inch that decides whether a room is genuinely open.
Marin wants people to see the hidden architecture, the stuff that makes a place feel welcoming or not, without needing a disability manual to understand it. So here's the takeaway. 32 inches isn't a magic guarantee. It's a minimum, and minimums often collapse under real-world conditions. Marin doesn't ask for buildings to be perfect. She asks for them to be tested, for code to be more than a checklist, for accessibility to mean usability, not just compliance. Because when the doorway is truly open, the rest of the experience gets easier. When the room is reachable, appointments happen, relationships happen.
Independence isn't something someone has to earn through extra effort just to get through a door. And when the doorway isn't reachable, the barrier becomes a boundary, one that follows Marin from place to place until accessibility stops being a label and becomes a living reality.
The next time you walk through a door without thinking, pause for a second and remember, for some people, a single inch decides whether the space is truly theirs or whether they have to turn around before they ever get inside.
If you want more of the parts of disability nobody puts in the pamphlet, keep watching. The inch matters because it changes everything.